Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Milena, for introducing me, and also thank you to the Kyiv Art Center to invite me. It's my first time in Kyiv. Never been before in Hungary, so it's for me something new. Maybe to introduce, of course, Milena introduced already myself, but to say a little bit, because it frames also my lecture. Let's say something about my lectures. I'm probably she said that I'm a sociologist, so that means I always look at what I call the institutional side of art. So how art functions in a society. That's also why I'm very much interested in arts in society and how it relates to society. And the last, let's say, 15 years, almost, yeah, 20 years, I'm very much interested in critical theory, politics, how politics is related to art, in this frame of, for me, what is important in Europe, but also in understanding more and more what is happening now all over the world. So also my lecture will be in between what I always call classical sociology, empirical sociology, which is based on my research, but at the other side also more and more speculative thinking, inspired by some artists, but also related to more critical orientation in my work. So because Fragile State, I thought this was maybe the best lecture to do. It's a work I did, I think it's a study I made in here, no, half a year ago. It was an assignment of several art centers in Europe. One was Fabrica in the UK. One was Città dell'Arte in Italy. And they asked me to think about territory and exactly about what is happening with this European space and the relationship, of course, with the pan-European environment, and what makes this thinking and especially this political dealing with territory in those days so problematic. That was their main question of the assignment, and I try to translate this now in my lecture to understand this better. So this means I will talk for 10 slides without saying anything about art. And then I come into, I will try to frame what artists can do in this kind of relation, of how they are related to the whole discussion of territory. Anyway, first of all, I promised myself to dedicate every lecture this year to Mark Fisher. I hope you can see it a little bit. Mark Fisher, I worked a lot with Mark Fisher. He has written for several volumes and books I made with him. He has written beautiful books like Capitalist Realism is one very important book of him, but also Ghosts of My Life. And exactly Ghosts of My Life touches me enormously. It explains how the soundscape of London can make you depressive in a certain way. But I promised myself to mention him in every lecture this year because he committed suicide in January 13. And he is very much, for me, inspiring somebody who teaches, by the way, in London at conference. So also this lecture for Mark. Anyways, let's start now by contents. Blue Marble. Picture taken in 1972, and this is, I think, when the whole discussion of territory starts, because it's the first time that we saw, at least, we knew already, but that we saw that, in fact, there is a border to the territory we can be in. So this meant also, starting from 1972, when this picture was made, that a lot of ecological movements start to operate. They grow enormously in numbers, etc. Because they were aware when they saw this picture. Of course, everybody knew already long before that the world was round and endless. But this picture made it much more, in a way, touchable. That this world is the only thing we have. This is the territory we have, and we can operate. So a lot of ecological movements came up, but very interesting is almost at the same time there comes something else popping up, which is called nowadays neoliberalism, which grew already or was built up in think tanks already starting from the 1940s, etc. But really, sorry, I'm thinking I'm talking wrong in this. Really increases after the 60s, 72, etc., with Margaret Thatcher, Reagan, etc. And it's very interesting that they are parallel. I don't go too much in detail about neoliberalism, but in fact it starts literally, I think, in 1971, when, in a political sense, in a structural sense, when the Bretton Woods system collapses. So that means that money, let's say it very simple, is not connected anymore to gold. So there's no material substance anymore for money. At that moment, a huge flow of money over the world started, but also the fight for territory in this way. So we see, in fact, two parallels, and at that moment also the whole terror for territory starts. And terror means literally panic. It's panic for territory. Ecologists are afraid that they feel the heat breathing in their neck, the water at their lips standing there, so they really feel the panic. It's not 5 to 12, but 5 over 12 for them. And neoliberalism felt also that they have to explore every territory they can get in a quick and flexible, very fast way. So you see a kind of fight for territory, which is in fact what I call, which determines I call it the triumvirate. It's the triangle. Let's call it like that, in which we are framed now. It's the relationship between terror, and territory. And this is a whole structural starts, I think, in the 70s, this fight from two sides. So it's a kind of what I call bipolar panic. Panic from two sides, from completely different motives and from completely different ambitions. In it. One, to save the world, and the other one's to explore as efficiently and as fast as possible the world. This is the double movement we see accumulating and starting from the 70s and growing and growing and growing. Interesting to see is also, and now I come back about how was thought about land and where this panic, especially from the neoliberal side, comes from, and this whole thinking about lands as kind of territory you need to occupy, you need to have, you need to explore, is extremely urgent already, I think, in the 17th, 18th century in what we call the Wild West. You see those guys all with guns, and it's very interesting how they operated when you occupied the land, especially what they called the new land, the new America, so New Mexico, Texas, this area, which was a huge space opened in the Americas. And they fought for land, but they had a very kind of principle which is very interesting. I asked once when I was, it's 5 years ago or something, I had to give a lecture in Hollywood, and I traveled from Hollywood to the coast, and an old man on the bus, I was at the bus, I asked him, why do the Americans so love their guns? And he explained why it comes. He said it's all to do with what they call the first in time, first in right principle. So that means when you occupy as the first the land, it's yours. This is the whole structure. But very interesting is when the United States opened, especially to the South, Texas, the new Americas. What is interesting, of course, is because of this huge, enormous land which was there, the state could not guarantee that it could reduce violence, etc. So they need to take their own fate in their own hands. This is also very important in this principle. So first of all, how can you make money or make a living? By occupying the land. And those guns means, literally in the United States, that's what this old man also told me, it means ownership right. It is very much associated to that you can be the owner of a land, and it is very much related in a way of distrust to the government, in that sense that the central state cannot guarantee the monopoly on violence. And cannot guarantee that the land is taken from you. So you have to organize yourself to occupy. We can work for 5 years at one place, then move to another place, etc. And that's exactly what he describes in this beautiful book, I think, of Richard Sennett, the Corrosion of Character, how this high mobility and this flexibility also made that people do not embed anymore at a certain locality. They move from one place to another very easy, which is related to post-forest work, project labor, etc. And what is character then? It's the opposite. It means that you have a high loyalty and a mutual commitment to your direct context, your social context, the people who live there in the locality, but also the sources you use, the infrastructure you use, etc. And what's the Senate of it? Short-term capitalism threatens, in fact, this, or it corrodes the character, particularly those qualities of character which bind, there is it again, bind human beings to one another and furnish each with a sense of sustainable self. See here, I like the word, how we use it here. Sustainability means a completely different something is, but it means really sustainability of your own individuality, your own identity. So, by moving around the world in a professional career, you also have problems to bind yourself again, or for a long term at least, or in a sustainable way to territories. And that's one of the reasons, and he mentions it also, but he does not in these extremes, why we have so many people nowadays, which is called bipolar disorder. They don't feel literally, they have no ground to stand anymore under their feet. They feel literally bottomless. This bottomlessness is one of the hugest diseases we have nowadays as a kind of psychopathological disorder of human beings. I know a lot of young students even of mine, but also young colleagues of 30s, etc. all go to therapists, etc. And they come home, and when we have a confidential talk, most of the analysis is this: I have a bipolar disorder. Of course, it's a trend also in this kind of analysis. But again, it is literally that you feel that you have no, say, pathetic, you have no home. You don't feel embedded anymore at a certain place. The result of this is that, and this is also an analysis of Richard Sennett, is that most of adult people stick in their adolescence. And by adolescence, he means a specific attitude. He says, who is an adolescent is somebody who is very principled, who is not very sure about his or her own identity, so he's very stiff. He says, I fight for my identity, I want to do it. I have an adolescent at home at the moment, I know what it is. It is this kind of fight for your own identity. Of course, that's not a problem that youngsters of 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, but it becomes a problem when still Trump is an adolescent nowadays and behaves like that. Then you have really serious problems. And that's the analysis of Richard Sennett already made in the 1970s in the book, The Uses of Disorder, in which he says more and more adults stick in this kind of very rigid way of defending their own identity, confirming or wanted to confirm or being confirmed again and again in their own identity. Identity means also literally in Latin, sameness. So this is also a very interesting paradox, because we need to be so mobile. At the same time, of course, we feel groundless, and we have the feeling that we have to confirm again the same identity. That's a result of this kind of high mobility or globalization on the individual level. And of course, on the political level, you see what we see nowadays everywhere. Growing up new nationalism everywhere, walls are built, or people want to build walls, travel bans are gated in, and you get also in cities gated communities with enclosed their own space, and fortification, literally of Europe nowadays also. Also, this is a way of saying we want to protect our identity and rebuild walls to against this kind of flowing, liquid world in which we are living now. Maybe one thing about this liquidity of the world, or this flat, wet world. This is very well analyzed by Zygmunt Bauman, for example, who has written books like Liquid Modernity, but also Liquid Love, etc. What he literally means, indeed, that the world becomes liquid. But I like the word liquid because it is also related to, or it can be associated at least to, or it refers to liquid financial sources, of course. And this happens exactly in 1972 with the collapse of Bretton Woods. At that moment, money becomes liquid. And this is very important. It flows over the world. And as Saskia Sasse, the girlfriend of Richard Sennett, analyzes in Global Cities, it concentrates, money concentrates in cities. And what do people do, of course? They follow the money. So you get a huge movement starting from the 70s of immigration flows, etc. Because people, of course, want to have a good living and they search for the money. That's why we have this kind of enormous flows of immigrants. I know it already from, I grew up in the 70s, 80s in Belgium. We had the Italian immigrants, or first Polish immigrants, etc., working in coal mines, etc. It's of course a way of following the money. When money is free, you follow it. And by doing this is, of course, it's something very strange in it, or contradictory. You say the money can flow all around the world, but people don't. That's what you say, in fact, with this kind of politics. Anyway, this is how it's dealt, I think, more and more with territory nowadays, and this makes of this something what Oscar Wilde already expected. So he says, a cynic is a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. This is what exchange value or extreme exchange value is in fact doing with us. It makes us cynics in operating, in using the land. It makes everything hyper-relative, but hyper-relative, that you become cynical about using it. Okay, this is related to what I call in political analysis, or define more and more, this whole system in which we come, I define it as repressive liberalism, which is already a very strange contradiction, of course. Liberalism stands for freedom, liberal, but there is a very slipping in, already from the 70s on, a very repressive thing. And there are a lot of sociologists who made this analysis. Lacan is one of them. Punishing the Poor is a book in which he describes how the whole system of punishment and jails in the United States is in fact directly related to the free market system, and how the welfare state is changed in a punishment system in this system. But anyway, what does it mean for me? I came after it by reading a book of a Dutch philosopher, it's Hans Achterhuis, who made this very strange remark. He said, well, governments cut back everywhere and relegate tasks to the market, like mobility, public transport, libraries, schools, etc. The supervisors who must guard the freedom of that market grow and grow and grow. There's a very strange paradox in it. And he explains how he comes up with it. He questions also, why is this? Why do we see this kind of very strange paradox? And he explains it by a law which was voted in the Netherlands in 2006 about healthcare. And this law about healthcare was in fact included the privatization of the healthcare system. Very simple like that. And what is interesting in this analysis, and he uses a study of economists to make an analysis of the effect of this law on healthcare. And what this economist discovered was that the part of the GDP for healthcare in the Netherlands in 2005, so before the voting of this law in 2006, the part of the GDP for healthcare was 7.2%. So 7.2% was spent by the Dutch people to healthcare. Hospitals, medicines, etc. Very interesting thing. Privatization comes in 2006. Again, a measure of this economist in 2008, so 2 years after the voting of the law. This privatization of healthcare. The percentage of healthcare for the GDP was in 2008 already 13.2%. So people expended more to healthcare. It's free competition, markets need to work, so it's strange, because normally quantity, quality, you have kind of reduction, etc. No, the opposite happened. And that's the huge question Achterhuis asked, why? Why does this happen? And then, of course, the economist explains, they said, what they did in the Netherlands is, of course, the privatization of healthcare. When you do this, you need to, of course, because it's about the quality of people, of health of people, you need to control. But that they did already in the past, also in the Netherlands, had a strong quality control, central state organized, etc. What did they do in the Netherlands? They also privatized the control. So you had a lot of consultancy offices, research offices, etc., who are then in competition to control the quality of hospitals, medicines, production, etc. And very interesting is to control as the best, holier than the Pope. Why? Because that's the guarantee that they offer you quality. They say, when I control you, you are sure you get, for example, subsidizes for so many beds in your hospital. Because we have this quality label. So maybe there are less rules. Neoliberalism means deregulation. But the rules are followed in a very rigid manner because they compete to follow the rule as the best. This is the whole paradoxical system which makes the system very expensive, but also which does increase control and control and control, which makes this very strange paradox in it. And it's not anymore central totalitarian control. No, it is we who control each other. So control is decentralized in it, and there's a competition of control in the system, which makes this kind of repressive liberalism. This is not only happening in healthcare, this definitely happens also at school systems, at universities, etc. I'm living in Belgium, I'm Belgian, but I worked for 10 years in the Netherlands, in a university, and at the same time in an art school. I had 7 audits in 10 years. 7 times that they came to control. And the last office, which was a private office, who offered their services to do a pre-audit, because then we were sure when the real audit comes that there was a pre-audit and that everything was fine. Who did this pre-audit? This office was called Control. Because control is a brand. When you control us the best, that's quality. That means quality in the system. And this is a system which we get more and more. How museums are controlled, certain public services are controlled. At one side they say, oh, we give it free to the market, but at the other side we say, oh yes, we decentralize also and privatize control, while control becomes more and more urgent. Which is, of course, also related when you talk about healthcare, public transport, etc., related with high expenses of insurances in this field. This is also not only happening in the Netherlands, of course, it's also happening with culture in the United States, what this Lessing is saying. And this, I don't read literally his quote, but this made me understood, and this is for me very important, made me understood a book which I've read when I was 19 years old, and I completely did not understand it at all when I was 19 years old. It was The One-Dimensional Man of Herbert Marcuse, heavy Marxist stuff at that moment, and especially this quote I completely did not understand. He says in this book, under the rule of a repressive whole, liberty can be made into a powerful instrument of domination. See the very strange paradox. Make people as free as possible, and you have all in your hands as a politician to develop a very repressive totalitarian regime. And this is this whole paradox in which this repressive conservative also, or regressive liberalism, is functioning, I think, nowadays more and more. And when you analyze the politics, which can be very diverse, of Trump, Putin, we have in Belgium Bart de Wever, of the National Flemish Alliance, etc. They do all the same. It's a very strange mixture of a very authoritarian politics, very conservative, zero tolerance, for example, in the city of Antwerp where I live, and at the same time saying, yeah, we spend everything, we try to liberalize everything. This very strange paradox is slipping in the system. And this is, when you think about territory again, in fact, how at least Europe nowadays is ruled. This is the whole system, or the whole ideology also, you can say the political ideology on which it's based. And it gives us Brexit, it gives us Trumpism, which means, and this is for me very important in thinking of the territory, that they all think, in fact, that you can, they all believe in a kind of utopia, that you can make a market, a free market all over the world, a unified market space, especially, I think, especially Europe. I hope this for Europe, so that you can unify the culture of a territory by a unified market space. That's the whole monotopia they have. They're seeing a a way of thinking that it also becomes very smooth to have trade with others, etc., from the south of Europe until the north, and from west to east. This means also hyper-quantification, quantifying the land, the territory, hyper-relativism, I explained this also, and stimulating a rat race. And I come back to this rat race later, but like the first in time, the first in right principle, developed a kind of stimulated kind of gold rush or land rush in the United States. You see now again, also in Europe, a huge fight of having the best place in Europe, in a sense to have the best creative city, for example, where people come to visit. And the best means which is very huge economical rate. And you see a rat race. And a lot of conflicts nowadays, at least in Europe, are about this. Greece is doing that. And Scandinavia and the Netherlands are doing well. But also Luxembourg had some financial problems. But they are rich and nobody talks anymore about this, about corruption. Greece is corrupt. This kind of very strange fights you see going on nowadays in Europe. Anyway, so when you look at Europe, you see that this unified market of competition, in fact, organizes a lot of envy. People are jealous to each other, countries are jealous to each other. You see people who try, or countries, politicians who try to exclude again countries, people of it, and you see a lot of foreplay in the system, including Luxembourg, with the Luxembourg Gate, or what was it called, the Lux Gate, for financial corruption, including also, of course, Greece, etc. But you see this foreplay rising and rising. And so you see also, and this is the problematic, I think, what is happening nowadays with Europe, when you look at Europe as a monotopic territory, it comes from an utopia and goes more and more direction dystopia with Brexits, troikas control, that's the main thing what they do, access, and a lot of distrust between each other. And you see, very interesting, I think, what I call directions of longing. One direction goes like that. Still, a lot of Polish people want to move to the UK because there is the money, they think at least. Still, this is a longing which is going on, I think, since Poland was certainly in the EU, maybe also long time before. Which is much more stronger is this direction of longing. More and more people of the South want to go to the north because they are richer. And this is a kind of bifurcation which divides enormously at this moment Europe. And what is stimulating this is, of course, the market system, which puts everybody, relates everybody to the same line. Accumulation of money. It's very simple. And you can quantify you easily, less or more money. And there are winners and there are losers in this system. So, and this organizes, of course, a lot of envy, but also exclusion, again, in this system. Okay, so, as a kind of first conclusion, I think the market and economy in general cannot be the base or the substructure of a society. It's not where a society can stand on a sustainable way. So, I don't go to that in this, but I'm very much interested nowadays in something else, which is called Commonism, with an O, in which what's for me very important is to say, no, this is a huge mistake to take the economy as the base of a society in general, or a territory in general. We have to rethink about culture as the base. So not culture is the superstructure, it's the base on which we stand. And what is culture then about? Culture is about giving meaning. It is, I see culture as a huge pot with science in it, where you can take science out of it to signify yourself, to signify your context. That's culture about, the anthropological meaning of the world. So this means also, economy is all about culture. It is giving meaning to trade relationships. It is giving symbolic meaning to money as a color that it is worth something. So it's all about signification. I don't say culture is a good thing or a bad thing, can be good or bad, but it is in fact the base on which we stand, to signify ourselves, to signify our environment, to signify politics, to signify democracy, for example, is a cultural product, of course, the signification of politics. And that is what communism tries to do. Reframe this, and by doing this, of course, say, oh, when it's all about signification, it means also that you can re-signify economy, you can re-signify a market system, etc., in a different way. And that's what communism tries to do. Anyway, I jumped, we can discuss later with Q&A, etc., what I exactly mean by this communism, but I want to jump into what artists can do and go into the art side of it. In fact, artists are schooled very well, I think, to do, or they are talented to do when they are not schooled, a good artist, to do exactly one very important thing, and that's cultivating territory. It means, what is an artist doing always again and again? Finding new significations to signify things in his or her environment. So he brings in, or she brings in, again and again, a new signifier and asks to the world, do you accept my new signifier? That is what an artist is doing. That's cultivating, literally. Not like the farmer cultivated the land, but it is giving meaning to the territory. So artists again and again load the territory again and again with signifiers in the beautiful idealistic sense, because we know, of course, that a lot of artists just use also art as a change value. And that's why I use this also. I don't know if you can read it. This was painted at a wall at Documenta in Athens. The phrase, I come later to this, so it's funny, the group calls himself, what is it? Criminenta or something like that, as a paraphrase of Documenta. And they say the crisis of commodity or the commodity of crisis, they question in the Documenta of. And I come later to this, what I think is meant. But what I want to say, of course, and this classical things, a lot of artists see at a certain moment, at least, also their objects as an exchange value, and they put it on the market, etc. And literally, again, this means, like Marx said, they had to abstract of their sentimental or emotional or empathy, what they had with the work, and give it away for an amount of money. It's literally abstraction of your own work. What is happening, of course, nowadays with enormous figures and enormous amounts of money in the art market. But art does function also in a completely different way in this system. We all know that aesthetics can function as aesthesis, and that means that you can seduce by all the senses, by smell, by beautiful visuals, etc. And of course in reclama, commercials, etc. This kind of seduction is used again and again and again. So in that sense also art can play, or design, etc. can play an enormous role in stimulating this exchange value. And nowadays more and more what you see is the stimulation of creative industries, creative cities, etc., which has to improve, of course, the exchange of tourists from one place to another, who travel around the world from biennial to biennial, from Documenta to Venice, etc. So, of course, artists can play an enormous role in this exchange value, and even that's my point, even the so-called idealist artist with his backpack, who everybody in a lot of documentas or in biennials promotes nowadays kind of radical politics. A lot of discussion and debates are about radical politics nowadays. I think there was to lecture a year ago in the Moscow Biennial. There was not a word anymore about art. It was all about politics. And so the whole Saskia Sassen, etc., it was all about discussions about politics. But that's of course what is standing there in the back. This whole radical politics is becoming a commodity itself in the art world. Also, for example, when you go to Tate Modern, you have a beautiful library, and there is a beautiful bookshop also with classical books on the shelves from artists from A to Z. And then you have a department photography, and you've also one department theory, but not just theory. They're studying critical theory. So only the thing what is commodified there is paradoxical critical theory. They sell Marx, they sell Negri, etc. as a commodity, because it stands very well nowadays to be a radical political artist or an activist nowadays. A lot of artists also, or curators even, always like nowadays, or see it even as a status symbol to add before the word curator, activist artist, etc. And it functions very well in this system, etc. That's why so it's how I interpreted this kind of question. But I think artists can do also something completely else. And again, they are very much schooled in it. They can also redefine art and their undertakings, their creative business as use value. By cultivating, again, the land. One of the most important things they can do is cultivating again by imagination. Imagination what the territory also can be, or why it can be used. It's also the reason why I put here a work of Recetas Urbanas. It's based in Spain. It is a collective of artists, architects, and what they in fact do is they build houses where people want them. Where people want a house, where people want even a school, they build them. Most of the time illegal. So they reclaim the territory and say this is necessary, very much necessary to do. So they operate, and I like this very much, between creativity and criminality. All the way around, to make space again, to redefine the territory. And they use enormously the imagination to do this. I was in a lecture in Antwerp. I invited Recetas Urbanas. It's one of the guys called Santiago. And the first thing he said in the lecture, he opened this lecture by saying, the first thing you need to know when you want to make art nowadays, know the law. Know your own constitution. And then you can start making art. And this was really about this because, one, when you know the law, you know everything what is between the law, of course. And they work literally with a lot of lawyers to do this, to realize this. But you know also literally what stands in the Constitution, and you can use the Constitution against neoliberal politics. And that's what they, in fact, try to do. And by doing this, they redefine real estate in cities, spaces, land, squares in cities, again and again, using your imagination. And of course, this is important. There is a multitude of articulations of the land, again and again. Every single artist does this, or tries to do this. And this is very important because you use the land in a way without exploiting it. This is literally going back to use value and not using it as exchange value. And they can also, of course, use aesthetics in a completely different way. And this is for me very important. I think artists can make you sensitive to a place, a land, a territory again. This is, of course, a classical way of how artists were used in nationalism, in building the nation state, in a negative sense. But nowadays you see more and more how artists in public space, or even they try to make public space again, by saying this is an important place that everybody can work with, and I do an intervention here, artistic intervention, to make this visible again. So but they really can make you sensitive for a place, like you feel not sensitive to a house, which you can easily sell, but makes you sensitive like a home. Design, smell, the colors of your house really embed in your house. It gives you a feeling with yours. And the same comes for Deterrent, which comes as a quantitative entity which you easily can sell or which is abstract. Is also, of course, a very important mental or can be value-loaded territory by interventions of artists. Again, what they also can do is, I'm sorry for the dark picture, is of course also redefining literally the use of places, territories, etc. What you don't see here, or this part of what you don't see here, is in fact what is called nowadays a kind of design of territory, what they call shared space. So you see cars, you see there is an event also, or you see not that there is an event at the moment. People are walking. First time I have such a place near to my home at a rail station in Antwerp, in Belgium. I said never with my children, with the bike on 6-year-old in this space with SUV drivers, etc., all mixed up. But in fact, at the end, you see it's very interesting what happens there. It works in a way. And it works in that sense that it is a kind of completely chaotic disaster space where everybody is looking for his way to cross the streets, cross the square. But not only people who are on foot or on a bike are doing this, also the SUV drivers are doing this because they don't. What is this? Where do I have to look, etc. And again, and also the tram who comes in looks at this, the buses, the public transport has to look at this, and you have a very confused space in this. But until now, I think it exists 5 years. We had only 1 accident. So in that sense, this place in a way functions. We have in this place enormous fights. People shouting to each other. You see it almost daily. Yeah? That people say, "Hey, you are on my way," etc. Or "Up," and they have to stop, etc. But what is interesting, of course, with such a space, it makes visible the whole interdependencies. So it does not mean that they say, for example, a car driver is equal to a pedestrian or equal to a cyclist. Of course not. There's a huge power difference between those two. But because you see each other, and you need to see each other because the spaces are not separated anymore, you need to be aware, even when you are a car driver, that there are other people who are not equal in the same space who use the space also. So there is in this space a very interesting thing, I think. There is no consensus of the use of the space, where you can walk, where you can cycle, etc. There's always dissensus, enormous fights, again and again, enormous kind of very strange of implicit negotiation, also going on and going on. But everybody recognizes that there is an equal right of use. They don't say again that they are equal, but there is an equal right of use, and this is recognized by the design of the space, just by the design. And again, also, I think this is something very interesting what artists also can do. Designing spaces, even urban spaces on a large scale, etc. To rethink also the use and the interaction between people. But in fact, this is not a monotopia, it is a heterotopia with a lot of contradictions, fights, constantly, etc. And I think this is very interesting way of thinking nowadays of improving, I think, the use value. Because this is also literally what is happening in this space, is literally you feel the use of it. You feel you use it. It's something completely different than you drive with your car on the motorway and you will feel that you are in your private space with your audio on, etc. And you only have to look at the road, and it's your road. That's the feeling you have to take the road, Jack. It's your road on which you have. Here you have to feel, oh my God, it's not my road anymore. At least other people claim it, which makes it also very contradictory. I think it's very interesting also not only to think about such squares in traffic, etc., but about Europe in total, about this. Can Europe also function like this, not as a monotopia, but as a cultural involved space? I just mentioned some artists who do this. This is Circus, Circus Amok in New York, based. That's the director. It's Jennifer Miller. It's the man with bird. And they do. I mentioned this for several reasons. First of all, because it's circus, and I'm very fascinated nowadays about not in circus as an art form, but in circus as an organizational form. How they organize the space. It's very interesting. First of all, they come somewhere and they literally do. They claim, in fact, parks which are public in New York, which are in a way privatized, and they put their circus on it and say, no, this is public space. That's what they do. And so they really put the pins in the ground and make their tent there and say this. And then what they say is, and we are going to make autonomous art here. So we define the place, and by doing this, we make the place also, or the territory, public again. Yeah. And this is very important. This very strange mixture. It's also, that's why I also like it, this organization of the circus is also a whole economy, of course, it's a creative economy, yeah, and they need to live from it. But there is also involved a doctor in it, because when they felt they need to, there are not only artists, that's for me very important, and as a heterogeneous group, with a lot of contradictions in themselves as an organization, they make and claim space again and again. And most of the time, they make a kind of circus with a political message, but a lot of circus also notice for children what they do here, etc. So it's not about making political art or something like that, or activist art. No, they are activists in their doing, not in the message of their artwork. Sometimes they are, in fact, but that's what they do. So reclaiming the space is for me very important. And this remembers me to somebody I interviewed, I think 2 years ago for a book, Mobile Autonomy, Thomas Hirschhorn. He said also, I'm concerned with making art politically, I'm not concerned with making political art, which is something completely different. You can make even, I think, a very abstract expressionist painting political. Yeah. When you use it and organize it in society in the right way. And that's when you load, I think, in a cultural way, again, the territory, again and again and again, when you use it as a metaphor. And that's what he, in fact, is doing with a lot of projects. Sometimes I doubt about these projects, but sometimes it really works. I think Internal Flame was one in Palais de Tokyo in Paris, in which he, in fact, reclaimed the institution. He says, my exhibition is for free, and it's also open in the night. Very strange mixture there in this space, where at one side Jacques Rancière was giving a lecture, and then somebody who had no a refugee or a sans-papier who had no papers, illegal, was lecturing, etc. This very strange mixture. Of course, this was only a temporary project, and that's also why I doubt sometimes at the actions of Thomas Hirschhorn, because it has almost no structural effects. But I think this thinking is very important again, of how you can make with also not political art, you are political again. And I come back with the tent, of course. I think to do this, we have to get over this whole idea of contemporary art. We really have to think about taking space again in society and thinking about, like Theo Jeffrey says, what is immersion nowadays to do. And in fact, a lot of artists I interview nowadays in this field are for me very interesting, because the first thing what I mentioned, especially Recetas Urbanas with this container, they are completely not interested anymore if they make art or not. They say, what the fuck? It's not important. What is important for us is that we have a kind of impact with our aesthetics in an autonomous way in the society. That has a kind of generates kind of effect. When you say it's art, fine for me, but in fact it's not about this. It is really about rebuilding a kind of
redefining literally your own territory as an artist. Again. So, to end, you can do this also at a very young age by defining or redefining the territory through art, through paint in this way, literally. And that's what I try to stimulate enormous to my students in art academies, etc. Reclaim the space of the classroom again. I like this picture very much. Of course, they don't know what they do, and I'm very happy it's not my living room. But look what they do with the television. It's still playing. It's amazing. So they say, no, not this. We make the space here. And I think this is also what the circus did. Circus Amok said, we claim the space here. We make space for our art or what we want. Of course, they don't know what they do again. But this is for me very important to try and redefine. And of course, when you replace this to one artist nowadays, then you of course get a totalitarian regime. It's one who takes the place. What is important is of course that many artists again and again and again reclaim the place and fight with each other in a hetero topic, this topic, no, sorry, not this topic, but in a dissensus way of doing this.